My name is Counselor Thuron Vale. I'm a Veldrani, a species that, if you are unfamiliar, stands roughly 3 meters tall, has a resting mass of nearly 400 kilograms, and has served as the primary peacekeeping force across the Galactic Coalition for over 900 years. We are not small. We are not fragile. We have fought wars that stretched across solar systems and survived encounters that broke lesser species into extinction. I tell you this not to brag. I tell you this so you understand the weight of what I am about to write. I was there at Verath Station on the day humanity's soldiers were laughed at. I was among those laughing. I have spent the 14 months since that day trying to find the right words. I have written and discarded 11 drafts of this prefatory note. My colleagues in the Bureau tell me I am overthinking it. They are probably right. But something about what happened at Verath Station refuses to be reduced to simple, administrative language. So I have decided to let the witnesses speak. I have gathered testimonies from 17 individuals who were present, human, Veldrani, Krothai, Suntory, and one pale architect who declined to be named but provided a written account. I have arranged them not by species or rank, but by the order in which events unfolded. What follows is the truth of what happened. I think you will understand why it took me 14 months to write this down. Counselor Thuron Vale, GCA Historical Bureau, filed day 412 of the post-incident calendar. I've been a dockmaster for 41 years. I've seen everything. Krothai warships the size of small moons. Suntory diplomatic convoys with 40 escort vessels. I once docked a pale architect carrier that didn't technically exist in three-dimensional space. I still have headaches from that one. So when the Coalition first told us that humanity was joining as a provisional member species, and that we should expect their military delegation to arrive at Verath Station, I wasn't particularly worried. I wasn't particularly excited either. I was mostly just trying to figure out where to park them. The communication we received said the Human Expeditionary Unit would arrive in one vessel. Standard freight class jump carrier. Crew complement. And this is what I remember reading twice to make sure I hadn't mistranslated it. Crew complement of 41. 41. I want to be very clear about the context here. Verath Station was, at that time, hosting a Veldrani peacekeeping fleet of 3,000 soldiers. The Krothai had sent a battalion of 800 of their warrior caste. The Suntory had 1,200, most of them communications and logistics specialists, but still. Even the pale architects had 40 of their, whatever you call the things they send, constructs, emissaries, I don't know. We had 4,241 military personnel at Verath Station when the human vessel arrived. Before the humans arrived, we had 4,200. 41. The vessel came in on a standard approach. Nothing fancy about the ship, a mid-range carrier, functional, not decorated. I remember the hull number was stenciled on the side in that angular script humans use. I remember thinking, they didn't even paint it. When the docking clamps connected and the outer seal pressurized, I went down to the bay personally, partly protocol. Partly, and I'll be honest here, curiosity. I wanted to see what 41 humans looked like when they were trying to be a military delegation. The loading ramp came down. And they came out. 40 of them in formation. One, I learned later this was their commander, a woman named Major Elise Carr, standing 2 steps ahead at the base of the ramp. I knew humans were small. The briefing materials had prepared me for that. Average height about 1.7 meters, average mass about 70 to 80 kilograms. Bipedal bilateral symmetry, one sensory cluster at the top, soft, very, very soft. No natural armor, no natural weapons beyond their manipulator appendages. Fragile bone structure, approximately 3 to 4 times more fragile than a Veldrani of equivalent age. I knew all of this. It still didn't prepare me for actually standing in that docking bay and looking at them. They were wearing armor, of course. human military polymer composite plate with integrated sensor systems. From a purely engineering standpoint, it was actually impressive, compact, functional, modular, but on their bodies it just looked thin. I remember the thought I had standing there. This is like watching children dress up. Major Carr stepped forward and extended her hand. I know now that this is a human greeting gesture. You grip the extended appendage of the other party and move it up and down. At the time, I didn't know this. I stared at her hand for a moment, uncertain what I was supposed to do with it. She didn't flinch. She kept her hand out, looking up at me. She came to about my chest with an expression that was either completely calm or completely unreadable. I learned later those are often the same thing with humans. I recovered my manners and performed the gesture. Her grip was firmer than I expected. "Dockmaster," she said. "Major Elise Carr, 4th Human Expeditionary Forward Unit. We appreciate the berth." "Welcome to Verath Station," I said. I'm told my voice came out fine. I was actually working to keep it steady because somewhere in my brain a voice was saying, 41. She brought 41. What I said next, and I have thought about this many times since, was, "Is there a second vessel incoming? We can prepare additional docking space if the main complement is." She looked at me, just looked. Not offended, not confused, just sort of patient, the way you look at someone who has asked a question you expected them to ask. "This is the complement," she said, 41. I didn't know what to say. I said something about coordination and quarters, and I think I showed them to their assigned section of the station. I was operating on reflex. It was only later, when I was filing the arrival documentation, and I had to write human military complement, 41 personnel, that I understood what was bothering me. It wasn't the number, it was the way she said it. This is the complement, not an apology, not an explanation, not any defensiveness at all. The way you'd say this is Tuesday or water is wet. Just a fact, an obvious fact. Of course it's 41. Why would it be anything else? I filed the paperwork. I went home that evening and told my wife about it. She laughed. I laughed too. We thought it was funny. Testimony of Warden Captain Dresch Vocal, Croth I Warrior Cast, Verath Station Security Division. The Croth I don't do a lot of laughing. We don't have the facial musculature for it, and our sense of humor runs more toward controlled violence and strategic humiliation of opponents. But if I'm being honest, and this document is supposed to be honest, the arrival of the human unit was the closest I've come to laughing in about 20 years. 41. We heard the number before they even docked. Word travels fast on a military station. The Veldrani dockmaster told his assistant told the logistics coordinator, and within 2 hours every military unit on Verath Station had heard. The humans brought 41 soldiers. The joke started almost immediately. I won't repeat most of them. Some of them were funny, if you find that kind of thing funny. The cleanest one I heard was from one of my own junior warriors, Keth, who said, "Maybe the other 40,000 are invisible." That one got a few laughs. What I remember more clearly is the first time I actually saw the human unit in person, the day after their arrival. We were in the main concourse, the big open area on level 3 where most of the station's foot traffic moves. The humans were moving as a group, not in tight formation, more loosely, like they were just walking. Some of them were talking to each other. A few were looking at the station architecture. One, I noticed this specifically, was eating something out of a small container while walking, and he was somehow managing to also observe his surroundings at the same time in a way that seemed very casual, but I found difficult to dismiss. They were smaller than I'd expected even from the briefing materials. I mean, I knew the numbers, but Croth they are, on average, about 2.4 meters tall, and we carry a lot of muscle mass. Standing near a human is like standing near a juvenile Crothi, except juveniles still have their armored carapace forming and humans have nothing. Just that thin suit and the soft thing underneath. Some of my warriors positioned themselves near the human unit as they moved through the concourse, not to threaten, just to observe. And maybe, I will be honest, to be seen observing, to let the humans understand the scale of the difference. One of the humans, a young male, I couldn't tell his rank at the time, looked directly at Keth. Keth is 2.6 meters, decorated warrior, enough muscle to tear a transport door off its hinges. The human looked at Keth the way you look at an interesting piece of station architecture. Not up and down assessment, not threat evaluation, not fear. Just, oh, that's a thing that exists. Then the human went back to whatever he was saying to the human next to him. Keth looked at me, I looked at Keth. We didn't know what to do with that. I won't say it made me nervous, I'll say it made me curious. There's a difference. But something about a soft, small creature looking at a Krothi warrior without a single biological stress response. No change in posture, no cortisol flush that we can detect through our secondary sensory apparatus. And then just continuing the conversation as if the Krothi wasn't particularly relevant. It wasn't what I expected. I filed it away. Testimony of Communications Specialist Yina Paller, Suntory, Varath Station Information Division. Okay, I'll be the honest one here since everyone else is being very diplomatic about it. We thought it was hilarious. Not cruel hilarious. More like the kind of thing where you're not entirely sure if you should be laughing but you're laughing anyway. 41 humans, for a military posting at Varath Station. During what our intelligence division was quietly classifying as a Category 3 potential conflict situation. I remember exactly where I was when I heard. I was in the comms hub on level 7, running signal diagnostics on the long-range array. Veth, my station partner, another Suntory, got the message alert about the human arrival numbers and just held up his scanner so I could read the screen. I read it, I looked at him. 41, he said. 41, I confirmed. We both thought about that for a moment. Maybe they're very good, Veth said. That was what started us laughing. To be clear, Suntory aren't combatants. We're communications, intelligence, logistics. We don't fight wars. We make sure wars are won or lost through information advantage. My role at Varath Station was monitoring the local comms environment and flagging anything that looked like encrypted hostile traffic. So I wasn't directly involved in the military posturing side of things. But I paid attention to the humans because it was my job to pay attention to new variables. And the humans were definitely a new variable. I started observing them during the first joint briefing session on day 3 of their posting. All the military units were brought together in the main strategy room for a situation overview from Counselor Vale. Standard procedure when new units arrive. You want everyone on the same intelligence picture. I was there for comm support. I had a good view of the room. The Veldrani took up most of the space, which they usually do. The Krothi were in a cluster near the tactical display, where they always go. They like to be close to the maps. The Suntory were spread through the room at various positions. The pale architect representative was in the back corner, slightly phased, as they usually are. The humans came in together and sat. They chose to sit, which was notable because most of the other species were standing in one of the side sections. 41 chairs in a room that held 4,000. Major Carr was at the front of their group. When Counselor Vale started the briefing, the humans listened. That's not remarkable, everyone listens to Vale, he has a way of holding a room. What was remarkable was how they listened. Most species listen to briefings with some level of performance in it. Veldrani commanders stand very straight to show they are taking things seriously. Krothi sometimes vocalize low sounds to indicate comprehension. Suntory take notes visibly to demonstrate attentiveness. The humans just paid attention, no performance. A few of them were making notes but quietly like they didn't need anyone to see it. Major Carr was completely still, watching the tactical display. Occasionally she would say something quietly to the soldier next to her. I later learned this was her XO, a man named Captain Adio Bello, and he would note something down. But they didn't raise their hands. They didn't interject. They just absorbed. At one point, the tactical situation map came up, the one showing the Varath corridor and the reported positions of the Rathak incursion fleet. The Rathak are, for context, a mid-tier aggressive species who had been pushing at coalition boundary zones for about 8 months. Not a serious war yet. A serious problem. The kind of thing that gets worse if you don't address it and gets much worse if you address it wrong. The incursion fleet on the map was about 600 vessels, combat configured. I was watching the room's reactions. The Veldrani commanders leaned in toward the display. The Krothai made their low sounds. The Suntory scribbled. The Pale Architect did whatever it does when it processes information. I looked at the human section. Major Carr had tilted her head about 15 degrees. She was still looking at the map. Her expression hadn't changed. She said something very quietly to Bello, too quiet for me to catch even with my augmented audio. Whatever she said, Bello's eyebrows went up. Then he nodded. That was the full extent of the human reaction to being shown a 600-vessel incursion fleet. I made a note about that. I wasn't sure why. It just seemed like the kind of thing you made a note of. People keep asking me what it was like being there when they laughed at us. Like they expect me to say it hurt. Like they want me to have a moment of wounded pride they can feel sympathetic about. Honestly, we expected it. Look, I don't say that to sound cool. I say it because it's true. We got the briefing on the way over. Veldrani standard military unit, somewhere between 800 and 3,000. Krothai standard battalion, 6 to 800 warrior caste. We knew what we were walking into. We knew how it would look. The major briefed us about it 3 days before we reached Varath station. She sat us all down in the main hold of the carrier. There's not a lot of room on a 41-person carrier, so we were pretty cozy, and she went through it plainly. They're going to find us funny, she said. That's fine. Let them. Your job is not to look impressive on day 1. Your job is to be useful on every day after that. We clear. We were clear. I've been with the 4th for 6 years. Before that, I was standard infantry for 4 years. Before that, I was a mechanic in my hometown, a place called Fethiye in southern Turkey, where my grandmother made the best lemon cake you've ever eaten, and nobody cared about galactic peacekeeping coalitions, because we were too busy trying to keep the olive harvest from drowning in a bad rain year. I tell you that because I want you to understand that I don't come from some kind of military dynasty or elite training program. I'm a mechanic's daughter from a small town who got good at shooting things and following instructions, and eventually got good enough at both that the 4th HFU recruited me. The other 39 people in our unit had similar backgrounds. Regular people who turned out to be very, very good at the specific things humans are good at. I'm not going to say what those things are yet. You'll see. Day 4 at Varath Station was when things started going sideways. We'd been doing orientation, learning the station layout, mapping access routes, identifying the stress points in the structural integrity of the various sections. That last one is a habit. You always know which walls are load-bearing and which aren't. You always know which conduits run where. You always know which section of the floor will give first if someone drops a concentrated munitions package. These are things you know. They are not things you announce. I was in the maintenance corridor on level 6. I'd asked the station engineering team for access, wanted to understand the environmental system redundancies, when I ran into my first piece of actual intelligence. The maintenance corridor on level 6 runs adjacent to the outer hull section. There's a sensor array junction there that manages the station's approach detection grid. Normal stuff. But I noticed something when I was pulling up the junction schematic on my wrist display. There were access logs that didn't match the maintenance schedule. 3 entries in the past 6 days, times when no maintenance was scheduled, from a credential tag that matched the station's logistics division, but was pulling up junction data that had nothing to do with logistics. I stared at that for a while. Then I took a photograph with my suit's internal camera, closed the schematic, and went and found Captain Bello. "I found something," I said. He looked at the photograph, he looked at me. "Let's go see the Major," he said. Testimony of Captain Adio Bello, human, 4th HFU. I want to be clear about the timeline here because there's been some confusion in secondary accounts. Sergeant Rourke's discovery in the Level 6 maintenance corridor happened on day 4. We brought it to Major Carr that same evening. Carr immediately requested a meeting with Counselor Vale. Here is where it gets interesting. Vale's staff came back to us within 2 hours and said the counselor was unavailable until the following morning. Could we leave a message outlining the nature of our concern? The Major dictated a message to his staff. She kept it general, anomalous access logs suggesting possible intelligence compromise, request for urgent meeting. She didn't put the specifics in a message that would go through a communication channel of unknown security. We did not hear back that evening. So we spent the night doing what humans do when we're waiting. We kept working. Rourke pulled every access log she could get from the system she had legitimate access to. Our electronic warfare specialist, Corporal Hemi Takeda, started running passive analysis on the station's comms environment, not intercepting anything, just mapping signal patterns looking for irregularities. Our intelligence analyst, Warrant Officer Priya Chandra, started cross-referencing what Rourke had found against the station's manifest and personnel records. By 200 station time, Chandra had something. She found 3 individuals, station staff, 2 in logistics, 1 in environmental. All Veldrani. I want to be careful here about how I state this, because it was not a species pattern, it was a recruitment pattern. The Rathak had been running long-term human intelligence operations in coalition spaces for over a year, recruiting across species. These 3 had been compromised individually, for individual reasons, over a period of 8 months. What they were feeding back to Rathak Command was sensor data, specifically, approach vector data. Specifically, the blind spots in Varath Station's detection grid. If you know the blind spots, you know where to point your fleet when you don't want to be seen coming. The Rathak fleet on the tactical map had 600 vessels. Varath Station, at full complement, could handle about 400 in a direct engagement, maybe 500 with significant tactical advantage. Without the approach detection grid, in a surprise attack through the blind spots. The math was bad. We laid it all out. Chandra had the documentation organized. Rourke had the access logs. Takeda had the signal analysis showing communication patterns consistent with Rathak encrypted burst transmissions. It wasn't proof. It was enough to act on. We waited until 700 to request the meeting again. This time Vale saw us. Testimony of Counselor Thuron Vale, Veldrani, GCA Historical Bureau. I want to be honest about this part, because I have heard certain accounts that cast my initial response in a more favorable light than it deserves. The truth is, I was skeptical. Not dismissive. I want to be clear about that. I listened to what Major Carr and Captain Bello presented. I looked at the documentation. I asked questions. But somewhere in the back of my mind, and I am ashamed to write this now, but it is true, I was thinking. 41 humans have been on this station for 4 days, and they are claiming to have found an intelligence compromise that 4,000 other military personnel missed. The math of that did not sit right with me. "Major," I said when they had finished presenting, "I appreciate the thoroughness of your analysis. I want to make sure I understand. You found these access anomalies in the Level 6 maintenance corridor." "My sergeant found them," Carr said. "Yes. And your comms specialist identified these signal patterns through passive monitoring." Correct. In 4 days. Yes. I sat with that for a moment. My station security division has a dedicated intelligence monitoring team. They have been operating on Verath Station for 11 months. I'm aware, Carr said. She didn't say anything else. She just waited. I made a decision that I now consider correct, but that, at the time, I made for partially wrong reasons. I decided to act on the intelligence. I decided to act on it because I believed the documentation was credible, which was the right reason. But I also decided to act on it partly because I calculated that if 41 humans had somehow found something that my team had missed, I didn't want to be on record as the person who dismissed it. That was the wrong reason. Regardless, I acted. I brought in Warden Captain Vocal from the Crothai and my own security division commander, General Thessa Arak. I presented the human intelligence package to them. I watched their faces as they read it. Arak is a 30-year veteran. She has seen everything. Her expression as she reviewed the documentation went through 3 distinct phases: skepticism, then focus, then something that I would call controlled alarm. This is credible, she said. It was not a question. That's my assessment, Carr said. When did you? Day 4. Arak looked at me. I looked at her. 4 days, she said quietly to no one in particular. I don't like explaining my mistakes, but I'll do it here because this document is supposed to be accurate. I brought in the 3 suspected intelligence assets for questioning. Standard protocol. Secure environment, full legal documentation, recorded. All 3 were Veldrani citizens and entitled to full coalition legal protections, and they received them. It took 11 hours. 11 hours of standard interrogation protocol, by the book, professional. At the end of 11 hours, we had solid circumstantial confirmation, and the assets had confirmed nothing. Veldrani interrogation resistance is not trivial. We don't give up information easily. It's biological in part, cultural in large part. 11 hours was not going to break it. The clack was a problem. The signal analysis that the human Corporal Takeda had provided showed a communication burst to Rithak space every 72 hours. We were 44 hours into a cycle. If the assets had sent an alert before we detained them, or if their Rithak handlers noticed the communication gap, we might have less time than we thought. I came out of the interrogation room and Carr was waiting in the corridor. She'd been there for 2 hours, just standing, not pacing, just there. Anything, she asked. Nothing confirmed, I said. She looked at the door I'd come out of, then at me. How much time do you estimate we have before they flag a missed check-in? Unknown, potentially 20 to 30 hours. And the fleet movement window, if they're planning an incursion through the blind spots we identified. If they push through now, before we close the gaps, they could be in engagement range inside 48 hours. She nodded, very slow, very deliberate nod. And you need to close the gaps now, regardless of what the assets confirm or don't. Yes, but we need the exact specifications of what was transmitted to know which vectors to prioritize. Then let me try, she said. I looked at her. I want to describe what Major Elise Carr looked like at that moment, because I think about it. She was standing in the corridor of a coalition military station, surrounded by Veldrani soldiers 2 to 3 times her size, 29 hours into what had turned into a genuine potential crisis that she and her 41 soldiers had uncovered, and that 4,000 other personnel had missed. She had been awake for, I later calculated, about 36 hours. She looked calm, not performance calm, just steady, like a piece of load-bearing infrastructure that is doing what it was designed to do. You want to conduct the questioning yourself, I said. I want to try, she said again. I thought about protocol. I thought about jurisdiction. I thought about what it would look like to hand Veldrani prisoners to a human officer. Then I thought about 48 hours and 600 Rithak vessels. "You have 2 hours," I said. She went in. She took one other person with her, Sergeant Rourke. Testimony of Sergeant First Class Delia Rourke, human, 4th HFU. I'm going to be careful about what I say here because some of what happened in that room is still covered by a coalition intelligence classification. I'll say what I can. We walked in. The 3 assets were seated. They'd been through 11 hours of Veldrani interrogation. They were tired but not broken. They looked at us the way everyone on that station had been looking at us since we arrived, like we were a curiosity, like we were small. The one in the middle, I'll call him Asset 1 since his name is classified, looked at Major Carr the way Dockmaster Chu Vassi had looked at her hand at the dock, like he was waiting to see what this tiny creature thought it was going to do. I'm not going to explain the technique the Major used, not because it's classified, though that's part of it, but because it's one of those things that's harder to explain than to witness. What I'll say is that it didn't involve threats. It didn't involve pain. It didn't involve anything that would violate the coalition legal charter under which the questioning was conducted. What it involved was patience and an understanding of how people behave when they're calculating risk versus exposure, and an ability to just wait, to let silence do the work, to notice the small things, the slight tension in a jaw, the half-second pause before a non-answer, the way a person's hands move when they're deciding what to tell you, and respond to those instead of the words. Humans are very, very good at reading other humans. It turns out we're not bad at reading non-humans either. 50 minutes. That's how long it took. 50 minutes, and Asset 1 gave us the burst transmission contents. Not all of it. He still had things he was holding back, and we knew it, and he knew we knew. But the key data, the specific vectors, 3 approach corridors, precise coordinates, the projected timeline. General Arak was watching through the observation feed. I know this because when we came out, she was standing with her whole command staff, and they all had that look. I'd seen it a few times on this deployment of people who are recalibrating something internal. 51 minutes, Arak said, looking at her chronometer. 50, the Major said. She was already pulling up the vector data on her display. I need to close these gaps immediately, Arak said. Yes, the Major said, and we need to talk about what we do after. Testimony of Warden Captain Dresh Vocal, Crothai Warrior Cast. Here is where I have to be honest about my own role in what came next, and it is not a comfortable thing to be honest about. After the interrogation, the station went into a controlled high-alert posture. Sensor blind spots were being actively addressed by the engineering teams. The 3 assets were secured for formal legal processing. Counselor Vale was in the command center running a full strategic review. The Crothai Warrior Cast units were briefed on the situation. 600 Rithak vessels, potentially incoming, through vectors we had just closed but couldn't be certain about. A military situation. I requested a joint planning session with Veldrani Command and the human unit. The session was held in the main strategy room. It was supposed to be a coordination briefing. Here's the threat. Here's our response posture. Here's how everyone fits. What it turned into was something else. The Veldrani had a plan. It was a good plan. 3 defensive formations, long-range suppression fire to hold the approach corridors, the Crothai Battalion as the forward shock force. Standard coalition doctrine for a numerical disadvantage situation. Major Carr listened to the full plan. Then she said, "May I suggest a modification?" Here is where I need to describe the room as it was in that moment. 4,000 military personnel, station command, coalition council representative, every senior officer from every species present at Verath Station, the tactical display showing the threat situation, the weight of what was at stake. And this small human officer, standing up in front of all of it saying, "May I suggest a modification? I will tell you that some of my warriors exchanged looks. I will tell you that I myself felt something that was not quite dismissal, but was in the neighborhood of dismissal. After everything, the intelligence find, the interrogation, the 50 minutes, there was still something in the back of my military mind that said, 41. You are 41. What Carr suggested was a 3-part modification to the defensive plan. She kept it brief. She had a display ready. The first part involved repositioning the long-range suppression batteries by about 12 degrees of arc, which changed their effective range against the approach corridors from static to dynamic, meaning the suppression field could track moving targets rather than holding a fixed position. A small adjustment, a significant one. The second part involved using the human unit, all 40 of them, in a specific role that I will describe in a moment, because it requires context. The third part involved the Crothai Battalion not as a forward shock force, but as a second-stage response unit, held back until a specific condition was met. Veldrani General Arak listened to all 3 parts. Her expression was neutral throughout. When Carr finished, Arak said, "You want to put your 40 people in the forward position?" "Yes," Carr said. "Against the initial incursion force?" "Yes." The room was quiet for a moment. "I am, as I said, Crothai warrior caste. I don't have the facial architecture for laughing, but if I did, I think I might have laughed then." "Major," Arak said carefully, "I want to make sure I understand the tactical logic. The initial incursion force, based on Rithak doctrine for this type of push, would be a forward strike element of somewhere between 40 and 80 combat vessels with boarding parties. Standard Rithak boarding party, per our intelligence data, is 12 to 15 combat personnel per vessel. We are looking at potentially 800 to 1,200 Rithak fighters in the first wave." "Yes," Carr said. "And you want to put 40 humans in that position?" "I want to put 40 humans in that position," Carr said. She said it the way she had said everything else, like a fact, like an obvious thing, like she was simply confirming something that should have been clear from the beginning. I'm going to write this section carefully because this is the part that most accounts get wrong, usually by making it more dramatic than it was in the wrong ways, or less dramatic than it was in the right ways. The Rithak incursion came on day 7. The signal analysis had been right. The vector data from the interrogation was accurate. At 3:47 station time, our newly repositioned sensor array picked up the incursion fleet entering the Varath corridor, not through the former blind spots, which were now covered, but through an adjacent approach they pivoted to when their planted sensors went dark. Flexible as a military force, not easily deterred. The initial strike element was 63 vessels. 63 vessels, 12 to 15 boarding party fighters each, hitting at speed. Aiming for the station's outer docking ring, the standard Rithak boarding strategy, go for the docks, control the access points, choke the station. The station's automated response systems activated. Long-range batteries started tracking. The defensive formation that Veldrani Command had established, modified per Carr's suggestions, came online. At 3:51 station time, the first Rithak strike vessel made contact with the station's outer hull. Emergency airlocks, boarding clamps. They came through in the station's outer cargo section, level 2, sections A through D. Standard breach-end board formation. Rithak fighters are not large, about human scale actually, but they fight in numbers and they fight with a specific doctrine. Overwhelm the entry point, push inward, control communications hubs. They came through the hull, expecting to hit whatever security force was defending the entry points. What they hit was the 4th Human Expeditionary Forward Unit. Testimony of General Thessa Arak, Veldrani, Varath Station Security Command. I need to be precise here. Our defensive plan, as modified by Major Carr, had put the human unit in a position that I privately, very privately, thought was either brilliant or suicidal, and I wasn't entirely sure which. The position was this: the outer cargo section of Level 2 spread across a network of corridors and access points in small teams of 3 to 5 in prepared positions, not holding a line, not forming a wall, in what Major Carr called, and I quote from the briefing record, a distributed denial network. I had asked her what that meant. She said, "We don't fight them where they arrive. We make them fight us everywhere they go." She had asked for and received 2 things from our station engineering team. First, access to the environmental controls for sections A through D of Level 2, and second, the complete structural schematic of those sections, including every maintenance shaft, access tunnel, junction point, and structural weak point. I had given her both, because by day 6 I had stopped second-guessing what the Major asked for. The Rithak came through the hull breach expecting a defended position. Instead, they found empty corridors. The automatic lighting was off. The environmental systems were running hot, not dangerously hot, but uncomfortably hot for a species that, we had confirmed from intelligence data, had a lower thermal tolerance than most coalition species. They pushed inward. And then, from multiple directions at once, in darkness and heat, from positions inside the walls and above the ceiling panels and around corners, and through maintenance shafts that no species above a certain height could navigate easily but humans evidently could, the 4th HEFU made contact. Testimony of Corporal Hemi Takeda, human, 4th HEFU. I know you want the big exciting version of what happened, and I'll get there, but I want to first say that the 20 minutes of prep work we did before the breach mattered more than the fighting itself. Rourke ran the environmental controls. I ran the comms interference, nothing that blocked our internal system, but enough to make Rithak burst-to-vessel communication unreliable. Chandra had the structural map loaded on every team's display. The Major had us in position 2 hours before the estimated breach window. 2 hours. We were in the walls, literally, maintenance shafts. I was in a shaft roughly half a meter wide in the dark next to Corporal Fen Osaibansu for 2 hours waiting. Osaibansu is from Ghana. He whispered jokes to me for 90 minutes. I will not repeat them because they're not appropriate for an official historical document, but they were very funny. When the breach happened, we felt it through the hull, a grinding vibration that's unmistakable when you've been on enough exercises. We stopped joking and we went to work. My role was electronic warfare and comms. Osaibansu was direct action. We were one of 8 teams spread through the sections. The rule was simple: hit, disengage, reposition, hit again from somewhere else. Never the same position twice. Never give them a fixed point to anchor their response to. There's a thing about fighting in an environment you've studied for 48 hours. In darkness you've set yourself, using thermal management to reduce your signature, while the environment is running warm enough to degrade their situational awareness. There's a thing about fighting in shafts and corners that are the exact right size for a 1.75 meter human body, but tight for a 1.8 to 2 meter Rithak fighter in full combat armor. It's not a fair fight. It was not supposed to be a fair fight. Testimony of Warden Captain Dresh Vokal, Crothai Warrior Cast. I was watching from the command center. The tactical display was showing the situation in real-time, transponder signals from the human unit, heat signatures from the Rithak incursion force, the position tracking that Chandra had set up. What I saw on that display is something I have described to other Crothai, and they don't believe me until I show them the archival recording. 63 Rithak vessels, between 8 and 1,200 fighters in the breach zone, 40 humans. The display showed the human transponders moving, constantly, not holding positions, moving, here then there then somewhere else. Each movement was small, each contact was brief, but there were so many of them and they never stopped. The Rithak heat signatures, We could track the density of their formation, started spreading. They were trying to find the humans. They were pushing into sections they hadn't planned to enter, chasing contacts that had already moved. Their formation cohesion was breaking down. I have fought in 12 engagements. I have studied coalition military history across 9 species. What I was watching on that display had a name. It's called a force dissolution strategy. You don't meet a larger force head-on. You break it into pieces small enough to handle. It's not a new tactic. It's very old. Almost every military tradition has a version of it. But watching it executed in real time, in a degraded environment, by 40 beings who most of us on that station had been laughing about 6 days ago. I stopped watching the display. I walked to the viewport. I watched the lights flickering in the outer hull sections where the fighting was happening. I was very quiet. Testimony of Communications Specialist Yina Paller, Suntory. I was on comms duty during the engagement. My job was monitoring. I'll tell you what I monitored. The human internal comms channel which I was patched into with authorization was extraordinarily calm, not quiet. They were talking constantly, short and efficient. Position updates, contact reports. Moving, clear, coming to you, hold one. There was no panic in it. There was urgency, the clipped, tight urgency of people who are doing something physically demanding and need to communicate fast, but not panic. At one point, about 40 minutes into the engagement, I heard Sergeant Rourke's voice on the channel. Takeda, I need you east 30 meters. Takeda, copy 2 minutes. Rourke, 1.5 if you can. Takeda, yeah, fine. That exchange has stayed with me for 14 months. I don't know entirely why. Something about the yeah, fine of it. The complete absence of drama. 1.5 minutes in a live combat situation, moving through a maintenance shaft, and the response is yeah, fine. Like she'd asked him to pass the salt. The Rithak comms channel, which I was also monitoring, was very different. It started coherent, then fragmented, then by 50 minutes in it was almost entirely overlapping transmissions. They were looking for an anchor point and not finding one. They were reporting contact from positions they couldn't locate. They were requesting backup that the other elements couldn't provide because the other elements were having the same problem. At 1 hour and 4 minutes into the engagement, the Rithak command vessel sent the withdrawal signal. I know this because their comms cleared up completely at that point, one signal, unambiguous, coming from the fleet command position. They sent it twice. The incursion force withdrew. Total engagement duration, 1 hour 17 minutes. Human unit, 40 in, 40 out. 4 with injuries requiring medical treatment. None life-threatening. 1 broken arm, Corporal Osabansu, from a fall in a maintenance shaft. 2 pressure-induced hearing impacts from close-range weapons discharge in enclosed spaces. 1 human had been hit by a Rithak blade weapon across the shoulder, a wound that was serious but treated successfully on board. All 4 were treated at the station medical facility, and all 4 were back at their duty stations within 48 hours. Human unit casualties, 0. Rithak incursion force withdrew. The larger fleet, receiving word of the initial element's failure to secure the boarding zone, recalculated engagement probability and pulled back to the edge of the Varath corridor. They remained there for 9 days before withdrawing fully from coalition space. We never had to deploy the Veldrani main fleet. We never had to deploy the Krothai battalion. We deployed 40 humans, a structural schematic, and an environmental management plan. And they held. Testimony of Sergeant First Class Delia Rourke, human, 4th HFY. The medical team who treated my shoulder was Veldrani, very professional, very thorough. The doctor, I can't remember his name, I was pretty focused on not showing how much the local anesthetic was making my arm feel weird, was very careful with me. Kept asking if I was in pain. I told him I was fine. At one point he stopped what he was doing and looked at me, not at my shoulder, at me. He said, "How long have humans been doing this?" I thought about the question, doing what? He gestured vaguely, in a way that seemed to encompass my entire situation. This. All of this. I thought about my grandmother's village in Turkey, about the Ottoman history, about Gallipoli and the Roman legions and every piece of military history I'd studied, because understanding how humans fight requires understanding how humans have always fought. About the Mongol riders who hit and faded until their enemies didn't know which direction to look. About the guerrilla campaigns of the 20th century. About every cornered, outnumbered group of humans who had ever decided that if they were going to fight, they were going to fight smart. "Long time," I said. He nodded. He finished treating my shoulder. He was quiet for a moment and then he said, "I laughed when I heard 41. I looked at him. He held my gaze. "I want you to know, I understand why that was wrong." I thought about what to say. I said, "Most people laugh." "Does it bother you?" I thought about that honestly. "It used to," I said. "Now it's more like I understand why it looks the way it looks. We're small. We look soft. 41 of us in a station with 4,000 of everyone else. If I saw a species that looked like us, I'd probably have questions too." But I looked at my shoulder where he'd finished the bandaging. "Good work, clean." "But the numbers were never the point," I said. "The numbers were never what made us dangerous." He thought about that. "What did?" I smiled. I don't think he entirely understood the smile from the look on his face. "The fact that we knew we were small," I said. "We've always known. Since the first time a human stood in front of something much bigger than them and decided to think their way out instead of muscle their way out. We've had a very long time to get good at that." He didn't say anything for a moment. "I understand now," he said quietly. "I understand why 41. Testimony of Counselor Thuron Vale, Veldrani, GCA Historical Bureau. In the days after the engagement, something happened on the station that I don't think any of us quite expected. The Veldrani soldiers wanted to talk to the humans, not officially, not in briefings, just talk. I would see in the corridors and in the station's common areas groups of Veldrani warriors sitting with one or two humans asking questions. The Veldrani towered over them. And the humans sat there in the middle of these enormous creatures and talked, the way they always talked, easily, unhurriedly, without any apparent awareness that they were supposed to feel small. The Crothai did something that I genuinely did not anticipate. Warden Captain Vocal formally requested a joint training session with the 4th HEFU. Croth, warrior caste requesting instruction from a human unit. I processed that paperwork myself. I spent a long time looking at it. The Suntory Communications Division, at Paller's initiative, put together a comms analysis of the engagement and presented it to the station intelligence team. The analysis included annotations from Corporal Takeda on the electronic warfare components. It was received as a significant intelligence contribution and filed in the Coalition's Tactical Doctrine database. Major Carr, throughout all of this, maintained the same bearing she had walked off the ship with. She attended the after-action review. She gave her debrief. She spent most of the next week making sure her injured soldiers were recovering properly and filing the incident documentation with a level of thoroughness that my own administrative staff commented on. At one point I passed her in the corridor, just the two of us, no ceremony, no audience, and I stopped. "Major," I said. She stopped. I looked at her, this small human, 1.7 meters, soft, no natural armor. Eyes that had been awake for almost 2 days straight at one point during this crisis, and that had looked at a tactical display showing 600 enemy vessels and shown me. I now knew, not the absence of fear, but something much more interesting, the presence of calculation. 41, I said. She waited. I understand now, I said, why 41 is enough. She looked up at me for a moment. Then something shifted in her face, not quite a smile, more like a quiet acknowledgement. It's not about the 41, she said. It's about what the 41 know. She started walking again. I stood in the corridor for a moment longer, thinking about that. People have asked me since we got back to human coalition space whether we were scared. I want to answer that question properly. Yes, of course we were scared. I was terrified during the hours leading up to the engagement, not in a way that made me useless, adrenaline, cortisol, the full biological package that evolution built into the human system for exactly this kind of situation, but scared. My hands were steady, but my heart was very loud. During the engagement, I was in the command post we'd established in a secure section behind the forward zone, running the tracking display that Vocal later watched from the main command center. I could see where my teammates were. I could see where the Rithak were. I could see the two sets of data interacting in real time. I was scared the whole time. And I was doing my job the whole time. I don't think those two things contradict each other. I think humans have a very specific, very old relationship with fear that might look different from the outside than it is on the inside. We get scared. We know we get scared. And then we figure out what to do anyway, because the alternative is worse. Something that I thought about during those hours in the command post, and I've thought about many times since, is that this was not an exceptional situation for humanity. What I mean is, the specific situation was new. The galaxy is new. The Rithak, the Veldrani, the Coalition, all of it new. But the basic situation, 40 humans outnumbered in an environment they didn't design against an opponent that expected to overwhelm them by force. That's almost every war humans ever fought for the first 4,000 years of our recorded history. We've had practice. What the other species at Verath Station didn't know, what I think they're starting to understand now, is that humanity never arrived at space exploration from a position of physical dominance. We were not the biggest animals. We were not the fastest. We had no natural armor, no venom, no particularly impressive strength relative to many of the things that wanted to kill us. What we had was the ability to think, plan, communicate, and endure discomfort at a level that, as far as we can tell, was fairly unusual in our native ecosystem. And we had 60 or 70,000 years of practice, applying all of that in situations where we were the small ones. We've never stopped being the small ones, not really. We just got very, very good at being them. Testimony of Warden Captain Dresh Vocal, Crothai Warrior Cast. The joint training session happened 3 weeks after the engagement. I want to say something about it because it's part of what changed my understanding. I expected the humans to teach us guerrilla tactics, distributed warfare, the kind of things they demonstrated at level 2. Instead, Major Carr started the session differently. She stood in front of a room of Crothai warriors, most of us significantly larger than her, all of us watching, and she said, "Before we talk tactics, I want to talk about what makes a soldier effective." I expected a speech about heart or bravery or some motivational thing. What she said was awareness, adaptability, and the ability to be patient. She talked about patience for a long time, about how patience is not the same as passivity, about how the most effective military action often happens before the first shot, in the intelligence gathering, the position preparation, the environmental understanding, about how a soldier who has waited 2 hours in a maintenance shaft and is still thinking clearly is worth 10 soldiers who charge in without that preparation. The Crothai are not naturally patient. We are powerful, and we know it, and our instinct is to meet force with force. It has served us for centuries. But I sat in that room, and I listened to this small human talk about patience as a weapon, and I thought about 41 people who had arrived at a station and spent their first 4 days quietly learning everything about it. I thought about Rourke in the level 6 maintenance corridor, not because she had to be there, not because anyone told her to, but because she wanted to understand the system. Because understanding the system might matter later. It mattered later. I asked Major Carr at the end of the session how long humans train to develop that kind of awareness. She thought about it. We don't train it exactly, she said. We grow up in it. The world we come from, it's complicated. Many things want to hurt you. Many things go wrong. You learn to pay attention young. I thought about what it would mean to grow up on a world that taught you, from the beginning, that attention was survival. That makes you very formidable, I said. She looked at me. It made us very tired, she said, but yes, eventually that too. Final archival entry, Dr. Oren Chuvasi, Veldrani. I want to end my contribution to this record with something small. 6 weeks after the engagement, on the day the 4th HFU's assignment at Varath Station concluded, and they were preparing to reboard their carrier for departure, I went down to the docking bay again. Same bay where I'd stood when they arrived. Major Carr came down the ramp first, the same way she'd come up it 6 weeks earlier. 40 personnel in formation behind her. Same ship. Same stenciled hull number. She saw me standing there and came over. I extended my hand first. I knew what to do with it now. She gripped it, firm the way she always did. Safe departure, Major, I said. Thank you, Dockmaster, for everything. I let go of her hand. When we heard 41, I started. I know, she said. I want you to understand that Dockmaster, she looked up at me, same expression she'd had when she arrived, calm, patient. You don't need to, we expected it. Doesn't that make you angry? I asked. Every time, walking into a new place, knowing people will look at you and see what they see, she said. Yes, every time. She held my gaze. It used to a little. Now I think of it as information. If they're looking at the size and the number and they're laughing, they're not looking at the thing that matters, and that's useful. I thought about that. You use the assumption against them. I use the gap, she said. The gap between what they expect and what's actually there. Every species makes assumptions. Ours just happen to be very useful ones. She looked at the ship, then back at me. Take care of the station, she said. Take care of your 40, I said. She walked up the ramp, the formation followed, the ramp retracted, the docking clamps released. The carrier moved out on a standard departure vector, nothing fancy, functional, undecorated hull, same as it came in. I watched until it cleared the outer docking range. Then I went back to my office and sat down. I thought about the first time I had seen that hand extended toward me. This small, soft, unarmored creature, 2 steps off the ramp, looking up at me with a calm expression, waiting for me to figure out what a handshake was. I thought about the 11 months that station security had been monitoring the level 6 maintenance corridor, without seeing what Rourke saw in her first 4 days. I thought about 50 minutes in an interrogation room and 11 hours before it. I thought about 40 transponders on a tactical display, moving constantly, never in the same position, for 1 hour and 17 minutes. I thought about 41. I filed the departure paperwork. Under human military compliment, I typed what I had typed 6 weeks ago when they arrived. 41 personnel. Then I sat back. And for the first time, looking at that number, I didn't think, is that all? I thought how lucky we were.